In 2010, I landed in Cape Town, South Africa, and I had 3 goals and 3 questions. The goal was to visit 12 countries in 6 months. And the questions were, first, what are the goals to development on the ground here in Africa? In individual countries, regions, districts, communities, and individuals. What are the goals to achieving development? Secondly, what are the challenges or barriers to achieving those goals? And those are huge, broad, ridiculous questions almost, so general and so beyond my ability to possibly understand that, well, I was curious, so. But it was the third question that brought me to South Africa. And that was the reason for that journey. And that question was, what, if any, role do we as youth, and specifically as youth outside of the continent of Africa, have in supporting communities and individuals to achieve those goals to development? What can we do? And that, for me, was what brought me there. But also, potentially a ridiculous question. What can I do? A white kid from California with little expertise, little experience, little cultural understanding, no language skills, that I could even think that I could walk in to a continent, to a country, and try and do something that, up to that point, was something that a lot of people had failed to do. What was my role there? Was I so out of place that that question didn't even make sense? But still, that was the question. And it's not just me that's asking that question. We have to be honest with ourselves. There's thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of university students, high school students, youth around the world that are asking this same question. What can we do to make a positive impact in this world? To answer that question and to get into that a little bit, I want to scroll back a few years. 2005, I'm a university student myself. I'm sitting in classes studying political science, learning about war, environmental degradation, poverty, global health challenges, violence, suffering. And I can't help but leave every single one of my classes feeling absolutely hopeless and helpless and in pain myself for having to sit through that, and at the end have been given no actual action steps to be able to do anything about it, leaving feeling useless. And that was the hardest part. But it made sense to me. I mean, I'm studying political science. I'm definitely neither a politician nor a scientist. I don't have the experience I would need. I've watched the UN and the World Bank and the IMF and CARE and World Vision and every other organization out there in the world with all the professionals that they have try and solve these problems that we're talking about, and they're still there. What am I, in my right mind, going to try and do? But we still ask. All around the world, we still ask what we can do, because it's an important question. And so in 2005, like a lot of university students, I went to study abroad, to try and ask in person myself, get a better sense. I traveled to Ghana for 4 months, where I listened, I learned, I traveled a bit, got a sense of what was going on the ground, a small sense, but a bit of a sense. And I got interested enough, more questions really, not a lot of answers, but enough to withdraw from school for a semester, travel around West Africa, take some time in East Africa, asking more questions, meeting more people, learning more things. But when I came back to the university, I would say I didn't have any more clarity as to where I was going or what I was going to do. Mostly more questions, a few answers, but for the most part, I still stood there thinking, what can I possibly do? And I graduated 2007, and I took off to look for work in community development work in Latin America, traveling a bit. Ended up landing in what I would call an experiment. I think an experiment in making university students effective and sustainable in doing grassroots community development work, which in itself for some people is a contradiction, but that was where I was, in the mountains of Honduras, working specifically on water projects, working with university students to support communities to have access to clean drinking water where they otherwise did not. A challenge, absolutely. Something that taught me a lot. But still, those questions, even though I faked it some days, weren't clear, and the answers weren't clear. I came back to the United States 2008, 2009, 2010, traveling and speaking on a lot of universities about these issues, talking to students from the West Coast to the East Coast, 50 universities across the states, and having the same conversation. What can we do? Is that even a question we should be asking? Why are we even trying to go abroad? Can't people do it themselves there? They have the intelligence. They're smart enough. They can fix these problems. Why don't we focus locally? Again, these are all good questions. So after 3 years of working in the field of international development, community development, the truth was, I still wasn't really sure if there was any role for me, kid from California, to try and make a difference internationally. So when I landed in 2010 in Cape Town, and I asked that question, what, if any, role can we play? It was, for me, kind of the last part of a journey. I figured, this is it. Let me go to 12 countries. Let me meet with everybody that I can meet with. The federal government, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Finances, local governments, national and international NGOs, community leaders, and most importantly, community members. And let me ask them the question that so many of us have on our mind. What can we do? What can the thousands and tens of thousands of high schoolers, university students, graduates, professionals that want to make a difference abroad, what can we do? And the answer that I got was surprisingly clear. And that answer, across the board, was come. Come, because if you don't come, you can't understand. And if you don't understand, you cannot help. Powerful, I thought. Shocking, surprising, not what I was expecting. But nonetheless, very important. So I traveled and I asked and I kept asking. Maybe there were other answers, maybe there was a variety, and of course there always is. But let me take an example here. I've gone through South Africa, Lesotho, Swaziland, Botswana up, eventually into Zimbabwe. And I'm in rural Zimbabwe, central Zimbabwe, meeting with an organization, the Organization of Rural Associations for Progress. An incredible organization representing more than 50 communities around the area, more than 30,000 community members, led in part by an incredible Zimbabwean man, Dumisani Nyoni. And I asked him this same question. I said, you represent these communities to some degree. Let's say I represent all of these university students, high school students, youth across the world that want to do something. What would you tell us to do? Would you tell us to stay home and fundraise, do what we can from the States, from Europe, from all across the world, and leave the rest on the ground to you? And he said, look, Africa, rural Zimbabwe specifically, the communities, they're isolated. We're isolated from resources in a lot of senses. We're isolated from good education, good health care, literally isolated from good roads, good transportation. And we have our challenges. But if you want to talk about our greatest challenge, especially the challenge of the youth here, what we have is an isolation from ideas, an isolation from conversation, isolation from dialogue, and from communication with people from all over the world, with all different experiences, all different backgrounds, all different bits of knowledge and perspectives. And in that isolation, our youth cannot grow. So if all we can do, and all you can do as youth from around the world, is show up here to have this conversation, to ask, what are we doing? What are our goals? What are we hoping to create? And support that dialogue with youth on the ground, and give these communities a voice which is something that the international development industry has failed to do effectively for 100 years, then not only will you be able to support these communities, you'll be able to transform the way that we do this work across the world. He said, look, I wish this conversation could happen in the United States, to be honest. But the reality is that these community members are not going to show up on your doorstep. So bring the conversation here. Because in this dialogue, in giving communities a voice, we can change the way that this world looks. So for me, that was the answer. It wasn't the answer I expected, but it was the answer that I got. It told me that our power as youth is in that dialogue. It's in bringing people from across different countries, different borders, different backgrounds together to talk about who we are, as youth especially, and where we want to go. That's our power. So when we ask, what can we do? Which I still believe is the most important question out there. What can we do? For me, that's the question that drives this conversation, but it's not a question that can be answered in this room. That question, what can we do, can only be answered in the communities in which we aim to work. And if we can, as youth, here in this room and around the world, show up and ask, what can I do for you? What can I do to help? We will transform the dialogue that's going on the ground. We will change the face of international development. And we will create a better, more positive future for the entire world. Thank you.